When you think about it, committing sin knowingly is an awful lot like sticking your hand in a bucket of water that has a live electrical cord sitting in it, just to get an apple that's floating in the barrel. You may get your hand on the apple, but the price you pay won't be worth it. Listening to and participating in music that is degrading and dishonors God is sin. And if there's one thing that should be clear from this series of programs, it's the cold reality that sin always takes you farther than you want to go. It keeps you longer than you want to stay. And it costs you more than you want to pay.
Therefore, come out from them and be separate. Touch no unclean thing, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty.
In the Bible, in Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 21, God describes how a human being can begin to commit some very dangerous sins and actually end up spinning downward, out of control, until he or she is turned over to horrible sins that they never really imagined they would ever be capable of committing, and consequences they would have never been willing to pay.
Yes, they knew about God all right, but they wouldn't admit it or worship Him, or even thank Him for all His daily care. And after a while, they began to think up silly ideas of what God was like and what He wanted them to do. The result was that their foolish minds became dark and confused. Claiming themselves to be wise without God, they became utter fools instead. So God let them go ahead into every sort of sex sin and do whatever they wanted to, yes, vile and sinful things with each other's bodies. Instead of believing what they knew was the truth about God, they deliberately chose to believe lies. So they prayed to the things God made, but wouldn't obey the blessed God who made these things. That is why God let go of them and let them do all these evil things, so that even their women turned against God's natural plan for them and indulged in sex sin with each other. And the men, instead of having a normal sex relationship with women, burned with lust for each other. Men doing shameful things with other men, and as a result, getting paid within their own souls with the penalty they so richly deserved. So it was that when they gave God up, and would not even acknowledge Him, God gave them up to doing everything their evil minds could think of. They were fully aware of God's death penalty for their crimes, yet they went right ahead and did them anyway, and encouraged others to do them too.
I want you to make note. That downward spiral described in Romans chapter 1 can affect any human being who fails to put God first in their lives. It begins with setting God aside in favor of things you might find more interesting and enjoyable. God is no longer first in your life. That leads to having an ungrateful heart towards Him, to the point that you seek your pleasure and satisfaction in ways other than God and His ways, which is really foolishness, because it ends in bondage to horrible sins that you never imagined yourself capable of, and consequences you would have been unwilling to pay when you first thought that you'd just have a little fun. But things like sexual sin, and really sins of any kind, are simply things that are made to look appealing by Satan, but are forbidden by God because He is a just and holy God, and because He knows just how much sin harms us. And sexual sin, as we're about to see, is a classic example. Satan makes it look attractive, but if we only fully understood the price we'd pay, we'd never give it a second thought. But like so many sinful, harmful lifestyles, sexual sin is deceptively peddled by the rock and pop industry and portrayed in such a way that the youth of today are literally being scammed and lied to, as sexual sin is glamorized and made to look incredibly attractive. Well, in what you're about to see, that myth should be dispelled permanently. And, after watching this next piece, the myth that secular music doesn't usually glamorize sin, and especially sexual sin, should also go out the window. once and for all.
Like so many rock stars that promote the lie that sexual immorality will bring happiness, Limp Bizkit frontman Fred Durst is actually miserable. Through his music and videos, he is leading the youth of the world into a world of deadly illusion. Durst admitted, "I play the pimp thing on purpose, like when I'm on MTV. These chicks are fanning and massaging me." He says, "It's not like I attracted them off the street. We blank and hired them. I want everybody to be thinking I'm having the time of my life. But in reality," he says, "I'm, quote, single and miserable." Britney Spears emerged as the most celebrated female